Okay, I keep talking and my video keeps running out. So I left off talking about how when Moses approached the Pharaoh and 10 times Moses asked Pharaoh to willingly let the people go. And I think it became a pride thing with Pharaoh that this pesky former family member kept coming back, and I think it also became a pride thing because the plagues did attack the Egyptian religion. They worshipped the Nile, and like other places, they were worshippers of nature. And so by God sending these plagues, he was basically showing nature doesn't control anything, but that he, the creator, controlled nature. The fact that they worshipped cows, and here their sacred animal is plagued with boils. And then obviously they worshipped the sun. Ra was their sun god, and one day they wake up and wherever Egypt was, it was completely black as night, but where the Hebrews were, there was the sun. So this should not have been that way. The Egyptian gods should have been protecting Egypt from this Israelite god, but again, God shows himself to be the one true God. So Moses requests that the Israelites be released, but he refuses, and God sends the 10 plagues. And obviously with the last plague, that was the one that was meant to hit closest to home. The firstborn was very important in every family. It was the firstborn who was the that would receive all of the father's inheritance, or at least the largest portion. And for the Pharaoh, his firstborn would have been the next in line. And so it's at the death of his firstborn that finally Pharaoh says, yes, you can go. But even as Israelites are leaving the country, Pharaoh's heart hardens again, and he says, no, I won't let them go. And so he takes his one last ability to rebel against God, mounts his military, fills his chariots, and they go out after the Israelites. And as the Israelites are moving and they have everything that they own, they've seen the Passover, they've just experienced it where they had to put the blood of the lamb on their doorposts, and whoever did not have the blood on their doorposts, it would be that household that the death angel would come and take the firstborn. And so they had seen great and mighty things through these 10 plagues. They had seen a God come and show up like they hadn't seen before. And with every plague and with every way that they saw the Egyptian nation being attacked, whereas the Hebrews were not attacked with these plagues, they began to see that God was truly for them. As they walk out of Egypt, they see that the military is fast approaching on them. They begin to get worried. And in front of them is the Red Sea, and that is where God instructs Moses to go ahead and put his staff in the Red Sea and to walk across. And as he does this, you have the Red Sea parting, and the Bible says it's as if they walked on dry ground. So it wasn't even like it was muddy. There wasn't fish flopping around. God had completely cleared their way to make an escape. Pharaoh continued to pursue them, even in his pride. Okay, he's never seen water separate like this before. None of his gods, even the god of the Nile, had never separated like this before. And so who was controlling it? He didn't know, and he didn't care. And he drove his military all the way out into the middle of the Red Sea. And as the last Israelite crossed to the other side, God took his hand away from the Red Sea, and the Red Sea drowned the Egyptian military. So in one night, Egypt lost their pharaoh, the next in line for the throne, and their entire military. And so it goes without saying that while the world may not admit that these things happened, like we saw in that one video where they call the Bible fairy tales, and that there's nothing to substantiate it, nothing to back it up, we know that's not true. And you have, we know for a fact that these things did happen, and we know that this is at that point where the Egyptian empire began to crumble. Now, they may have had a few good years after that. I doubt it, because God specifically told Abraham, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. So it's very important. I go back to this, especially where our country is concerned. If our country and the leaders of our country are not blessing Israel, we are in trouble. And after these 10 plagues, and after Pharaoh and his military were destroyed in the Red Sea, Egypt never again saw the height of its power like it had. Imagine where Egypt might have gone had they remained friendly to Israel, had they remained supportive of Israel. Who knows? We might have been talking about an empire that lasted a whole lot longer than 1,000 years. So this should be coming to the end of your notes. Each plague was more deadly and more destructive than the one before it. Pharaoh agreed to release the Israelites after the 10th plague, but changed his mind. And Pharaoh's stubbornness led to the destruction of the Egyptian military and weakening of the country. Now, while you're catching up on your notes, I want to stop here and I want to point out that, okay, Moses is 80 years old when he does this. Then he takes the Israelites out he's leading them to the promised land. He gets to the Jordan. He sends over the 12 spies to spy on Canaan's land, just like the song goes. And then you have 10 spies that say that they can't do it, and 2 spies that say they could. And because of Israel's unbelief, God then says that you have to wander the wilderness for 40 years until this generation of unbelievers dies out, and that their children would be able to obtain the promise of the promised land. So that puts Moses at 120 years old by the time he's done wandering through the wilderness. We know that that in the course of his leading the Israelites, there were times when he did exactly what God said. If you remember that in their time in the wilderness, you have them being hungry, and what does God send? Moses goes before God and says they're hungry, and he says, okay, tomorrow I will send manna. Eventually the Israelites begin to grumble and complain because they're tired of eating the same old thing. And God said, okay, fine, I'll send quail. And one thing he did tell them is don't be greedy. Only take what you absolutely need for the day. And what would happen is, if somebody did get greedy and they took more than they should have, then the food would actually rot. Because God wasn't playing. You need to follow what God says exactly. Again, you have the Israelites grumbling and complaining, and God sends serpents to teach them a lesson about being thankful. Because every time they started to complain, they go to Moses and say, you should never have taken us out of Egypt. You should have let us stay. And many times God has said, you know what? I'm going to wipe these people out, Moses, and I'm going to start with you again. Even if God would have done that, even if God would have destroyed all of the Israelites at that time, he still would not have been breaking his promise to Abraham, because Moses was a descendant of Abraham. And through Moses, just like with the flood, God can start over and he can bring out a better a better group of people. But Moses would go and intercede on the Israelites, and he would say, no, you don't want to do that. And he would pray, and he would change the mind of God. You have the fact that Moses went up on the Mount Sinai and communed with God, came back with the 10 Commandments. What did he find when he came back? Well, he found his own brother helping the Israelites worship a golden calf. Why did they build a golden calf? Well, because Moses had been up on the mountain. People began to talk and to grumble and say, oh, he's probably up there dead and he's never coming back, and now we're out here in the middle of the wilderness, and who's going to take care of us? And so Aaron, even though he was supposed to be working for God, allowed the people to sway him, and they make this golden calf, and Moses comes down. He's so angry at what he sees. Think about it. He's up on the mountain with God. He's communing with God. He's hearing the heart of God and the voice of God. He's seeing the plans that God has for Israel. He's excited. He is anticipating the greatness that God has for Israel, and he comes down and he sees them acting in a heathen way, acting the way that they had witnessed the Egyptians act. And he gets so angry that he breaks the stone tablets. Then there comes a time when they're really thirsty, and he goes to God, and God says, okay, I want you to take your rod and hit the rock, and water will come forth. And so sure enough, that does happen. But on the second time that there was a water shortage, God said to Moses, I want you to go out and speak to the rock. And honestly, I don't blame Moses one bit. My heart breaks for him because he does disobey God in this one time, and he hits the rock because he's so angry. He's so angry at the complaining of the people. He's so angry at how they are treating him and how they're treating God. Moses lost some things in leading the Israelite people. His wife abandoned him and took their sons with her. She was tired of being the first wife of Israel, if you want to, because there was no pomp and circumstance. There were no fancy clothes that went with it. It just came with a long line of people who constantly complained. And so Moses was fed up, and I've been there myself plenty of times, and he acted out of his humanness, and he hit the rock when God said, speak to it. And because of this lack of faith, he is not allowed to go into the promised land. And so it's soon after 120 years that Moses dies, and the Bible tells us that no one knows where Moses was buried, because God himself buried Moses' body. So let's keep going, and that concludes our notes for the chapter. So wrap things up, and I will be back tomorrow with a video going over the terms of your chapter. If you have not done that already, you should be working on defining the people and the terms of chapter 3. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.